Today at 6, from the White House to Cornwall, Joe Biden's first overseas trip as president. He's here for the G7 summit. Before that, it's a meeting with Boris Johnson and a chance to give a new meaning to old ties.
It's wonderful to listen to the Biden administration and to Joe Biden, because there's so much that they want to do together with us, from security, NATO, to climate change.
But there are differences too, not least over post-Brexit trading arrangements in Northern Ireland. Also on tonight's programme. The Health Secretary's handling of the pandemic under scrutiny. He hits back at allegations that he misled the Prime Minister about protecting care homes. Taking operating theatres to where they are needed most. One way of dealing with a 5 million plus waiting list in England.
We are pressured to just accept the sexual harassment that we deal with.
9 out of 10 schoolgirls in England experience some form of sexual harassment. Calls for staff to be better trained at dealing with it. And Scotland's men say they're in a positive mood as they prepare for their first major tournament in more than 20 years.
And coming up on the BBC News channel, England lose quick wickets in the afternoon session. It's New Zealand with the upper hand in the second test.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. It's a summit of firsts. The first time G7 leaders are meeting face-to-face since the pandemic, the first overseas trip for Joe Biden as US President, and this afternoon, the first meeting between the President and Boris Johnson. Both men are keen to stress that this is an opportunity to refresh relations between the two countries, a new Atlantic Charter echoing one signed between the two countries 80 years ago. But it's not all smooth sailing. There's the thorny issue of Brexit trade arrangements in Northern Ireland. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg reports from Carbis Bay, where the summit is taking place.
Far from a casual beachside stroll, the first encounter of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the President of the United States. A new quartet, complete with the new Mrs. Johnson, and two politicians with very different pasts.
Are you pleased to be here, Mr. President?
I'm very pleased to be here.
Playing roles scripted by their countries' shared histories. Old tensions may linger, but this pair are determined to be new friends.
Wow, it's a great pleasure, Mr. President, to welcome you to Cornwall.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
Fantastic to see you.
I told the Prime Minister we have something in common. We both married way above our station.
I'm not going to dissent from that one. I'm not going to disagree with the President on that, or indeed on anything else.
Forget small talk. They want progress on COVID, on climate. Top of the list, proving the alliance across the Atlantic really counts. But that goodwill could be drowned out by the clamour about a problem right now. American concern about how a standoff between the UK and the EU is affecting Northern Ireland.
The single most important fact for the world's security, prosperity, has been that relationship between North America and Europe, and in particular between the United States and the UK. And so it's an incredibly important strategic relationship. And the talks were very good, and there's no question that under President Biden there is a massive amount that the new US administration wants to do together with the UK on everything from security, working together on all the issues of projecting our values around the world together, but also on climate change. And so it's a big breath of fresh air. It's new, it's interesting, and we're working very hard together. One thing we absolutely all want to do, and that is to uphold the Good Friday, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and make sure we keep the balance of the peace process going, and that's absolutely common ground. And I'm optimistic that we can do that.
There's no question this summit by the sands marks a shift. The two leaders' partners barefoot on the beach, the start of something new after the horror of the pandemic that washed over the world. A new American administration more interested in partnership than provocation. any first meeting between a British Prime Minister and an American President would fill a page in our history. And these two men have talked with conviction about the values that they share. But that's not the same as what their partnership might actually achieve, nor does it mask any areas where they might disagree. And this time round, American displeasure over Northern Ireland is very real. EU leaders will be on these shores soon too. The mood over the so-called protocol, how the Brexit deal is being delivered in Northern Ireland, is darkening. Northern Ireland still has to follow some EU rules. And if America can provide cover for a compromise, Brussels doesn't sound in the mood to use it.
While the EU has been very critical of what the UK is doing, can you honestly say that you are keeping your promise to cause the minimum possible disruption to the people of Northern Ireland?
Absolutely. The European Union is determined to make the protocol work for the benefit of everyone in Northern Ireland. And we have bent over backwards for years to find a solution on that. We agreed with the United Kingdom that the protocol was the only solution.
There can be friction between friends. No question about the power of the partnership between leaders in the past.
They say that Acme wangled that one in.
A refreshed, respectful relationship is easy to promise, but it's up to these two to convincingly create. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Cornwall.
Now, from the moment he came to office in January, Joe Biden has highlighted the differences between his presidency and that of his predecessor, Donald Trump. The G7 summit gives him a global stage on which to signal that change. Well, our North America editor, John Sopel, is in Tregenna for us. John, just how will Joe Biden go about signalling that change, as I call it?
Well, I think you're seeing it there from Laura's report, the concern that Joe Biden feels over Northern Ireland and the protocol. Would Donald Trump have exercised the same displeasure over it? Now, the US aren't threatening or warning Britain, but they are making it clear that they are watching this very, very closely indeed. And that shows America back on the global stage, caring about what is happening in other places. One other announcement, George, that I thought was significant from the Americans today, it is the purchase of 500 million Pfizer vaccines to give to the less fortunate nations, the poorer nations around the world. And I was on a briefing call with the White House where they said there are no strings attached, we're not expecting anything in return. It's an implied rebuke to Russia and China, who seem to have stolen a march on what can only be described as vaccine diplomacy. It may seem ugly, but there is a competition going on between the superpowers, between China trying to influence with its vaccine, Russia with the Sputnik 5, and America doing its bit as well. Joe Biden wants people to think at the end of this that America is back in the driving seat and is taking a leading role in world affairs, and that liberal democracy is not only surviving, it's flourishing.
John, thank you very much. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has been defending the timing of the first COVID lockdown in England last year. Speaking to a Commons committee looking at what lessons can be learned, he insisted ministers were following expert advice. He said that at the time, he was being told there could be as many as 820,000 deaths. It was also Mr Hancock's chance to formally rebut claims made by the former number 10 advisor Dominic Cummings that he'd lied to the Prime Minister. Our deputy political editor, Vicky Young, is at Westminster for us now.
Well, George, plenty of things have gone wrong over the last 18 months. What MPs are trying to do is to make sure those mistakes aren't repeated. They'll also look at what went well, the vaccine rollout, for example. Why was that so successful? Matt Hancock, of course, has been at the heart of the decision-making throughout this pandemic. Today, he gave a robust defence of the government's response, pointing out that it was an unprecedented situation which many countries have struggled to deal with. He also said that he was delighted to get a chance to give his side of the story. What more should the government have done to prepare for an emergency like this? When the COVID pandemic hit, crucial decisions had to be taken fast. MPs are trying to find out how that could have been done better. Matt Hancock recalled that early last year, he'd told officials to prepare for a reasonable worst-case scenario.
That was a planning assumption for 820,000 deaths. And I was determined that that would not happen on my watch.
So why wait so long before ordering a lockdown? Mr Hancock pointed out that there were very few confirmed cases, and the advice was that the public wouldn't tolerate restrictions for more than a few weeks.
I remember the moment around the cabinet table when I said, we are going to have to tell everybody to stop all social contact. Right. And I remember thinking, this is the most extraordinary thing that I've ever said. And the Prime Minister said, yes, we are. You better go and tell them.
Matt Hancock says the UK responded well in areas where it was already strong. So the NHS massively increased the number of beds. There was existing scientific expertise, but there was no testing capacity. There wasn't enough protective equipment. And ministers, he said, were making decisions based on incomplete or wrong information. One crucial misunderstanding was that the virus could only be spread by those with symptoms. Mr Hancock remembers seeing some evidence that this wasn't the case.
I bitterly regret that I didn't overrule that scientific advice at the start and say we should proceed on the basis that there is asymptomatic transmission until we know that there isn't, rather than the other way around.
And what about one of the most serious accusations?
Why did you not heed the warnings about dangers to the care sector?
Mr Hancock admitted there hadn't been enough capacity to test patients leaving hospital and returning to care homes. But
the evidence has shown that the strongest route of the virus into care homes, unfortunately, is community transmission. And so it was staff testing that was the most important thing for keeping people safe.
When Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's former top advisor, gave his evidence 2 weeks ago, he accused the Health Secretary of lying and said he should have been sacked for his handling of the pandemic.
Did you ever say anything to the Prime Minister that you knew not to be true?
No.
Thank you.
The best thing to say is that government has operated better over the past 6 months.
Which just happens to be when Mr Cummings left Downing Street. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
So, as we heard, one of the most contentious issues in this pandemic has been how the care of elderly and vulnerable people has been handled, including those living in care homes. Today, the Health Secretary defended his decision-making around the early discharge of residents from hospitals into England's care homes. But, as our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt explains, there are still unanswered questions about the decisions made at the time.
From care home to care home, families and staff want to understand why so many residents died at the start of the pandemic. Today, Matt Hancock insisted they weren't an afterthought. It felt different at the time.
It's been so awful. I mean, it's awful. It's just surreal.
Staff struggling to get testing and protective equipment.
I would appeal to the government. The guidance needs to change if they want us to look after these residents to the end.
And the sense of abandonment.
It's really not good enough. We need to be heard and we need to be saved.
Dr. Kathy Gardner watched Matt Hancock's evidence today and believes he sidestepped most issues. She's taking legal action against the government over the death of her father, Michael Gibson. He died of COVID soon after a hospital patient transferred to his care home with the virus.
There's absolutely an attempt to rewrite history. A lot of what the government has given us more recently just looks like the benefit of hindsight. What matters here is the truth. What matters is the evidence. Who said what and when. Not what they're now saying about what they really meant. We're looking for the facts.
For instance, families want to know the risk assessment behind the NHS letter sent out on March the 17th last year, a week before lockdown. It led to the urgent discharge of medically fit hospital patients. Some transferred to care homes, most weren't tested. That only changed on April the 15th. By then, 25,000 hospital patients had been moved to care homes. Matt Hancock insists few outbreaks were caused by this. He also says the important word in this statement a month later was try.
Right from the start, we've tried to throw a protective ring around our care homes.
Here at Pelham House in Folkestone, they lost 10 people, half their residents, to the virus. The home's owner describes what he's hearing now as demoralising.
It makes you feel dejected and to some degree in despair. There was such a lack of coordination and focus on what really mattered, and what really mattered was the care of vulnerable people.
It wasn't just England that struggled to protect residents at the start of the pandemic. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland also saw significant increases in care home deaths.
You got some more tea?
It means across the UK there are challenging questions still to be answered. Alison Holt, BBC News.
Now, the latest official figures on the pandemic show that in the past 24 hours, 7 deaths were reported and there have been 7,393 new infections recorded, which means an average of 6,287 new cases per day in the last week. Nearly 177,000 people received a first dose of the vaccine in the latest 24-hour period, meaning nearly 41 million people have now had their first jab. That's 78% of UK adults. The number of people who've had their second dose of the vaccine in the latest 24-hour period is over 316,000. Nearly 29 million people have had both doses, meaning 55% of UK adults are now fully vaccinated. And the time is 16 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. The Prime Minister and President Biden meet for talks ahead of the G7 Summit of Leaders in Cornwall. And coming up, the Duke of Edinburgh would have been 100 years old today, Prince Edward, on memories of his father.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News channel, on the eve of the European Championship, we'll be with all the home nations as they make their final preparations ahead of the opening match in Rome tomorrow night.
We've got yet more evidence of the impact dealing with the pandemic has had on the NHS's ability to meet its other obligations. Data from NHS England shows that more than 5 million people were waiting for hospital treatment at the end of April. That's the highest since records began in 2007. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, hears from patients who've been affected and what's being done to ease the problem.
The pain is just unbearable, so I'm just eating paracetamol at the moment.
Peter has had to accept he may have to live with intense pain in his hip for more than a year. That's the time doctors have warned he'll have to wait to get an operation for a hip replacement, and he feels that's unfair.
You work hard and you pay your taxes and you pay your national insurance. I feel let down, really let down that we haven't got something in place to cope with this.
New research shows the worst orthopaedic waiting lists in April in England were at Castle Point and Rochford, with 507 per 100,000 population waiting more than a year, followed by Southend, Norfolk and Waveney and Blackpool. The best were in southwest London with just 16 and Surrey Heartlands.
The areas that were hit hardest, that their health systems had to focus almost exclusively on that acute threat from COVID-19. And that meant that more routine services like waiting lists either were delayed or were done at a slower pace.
Hospitals are having to be creative with solutions. At this one in a car park, there are operating theatres in pre-manufactured units. Construction only started in March. They'll start taking patients from Monday. In that time, they've created the capacity to do an extra 120 operations per week, one answer to the mounting backlog.
So here we are with the new operating theatre.
Staff are already stretched, but they say they're determined to get more patients treated at the new facility.
We've seen patients in terrible pain. We've had patients who've been crippled by pain, and they've experienced tremendous disability. And we really do need surgical centres like this to manage those patients and finally get them treated.
Even during peak COVID pressure, cancer services kept going here. Latha needed surgery for breast cancer. She was nervous about the virus, but was relieved it went ahead.
You think things are going to be worse than they are, but the first time I went in, care was particularly amazing and didn't have any problems at all. The hygiene, temperature checks, social distancing, everything was in place.
NHS England said the number waiting more than a year for routine surgery had fallen, but the overall waiting list keeps on rising. There are similar pressures for the health service in all parts of the UK, and a sense it'll take some time to bring them under control. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
An inquest jury has concluded that the convicted terrorist who stabbed to death 2 people at Fishmongers Hall in London was lawfully killed by police. Usman Khan was hit by 12 bullets when officers opened fire on London Bridge. He was wearing a suicide vest, which was later found to be a fake. A BBC investigation has revealed that at least 13,000 sex offences a year by under 18-year-olds were reported to police in England and Wales between 2018 and 2020. Around 1,000 of those took place on school premises. And the latest review by Ofsted has found that there's a much wider problem of continual sexual harassment of girls in England's schools and colleges. Our education editor, Bramwell Jeffries, reports.
Every day, in every place, girls are facing sexual pressure, being touched, asked to share nude photos, their bodies rated and shared on social media.
We are pressured to send nude pictures, or we are pressured to just accept the sexual harassment that we deal with. It's become so normalised that we just disregard it and we don't speak up about it.
At a sixth form today, girls told me about the impact on their lives.
Every day women are harassed, if it's on social media, if it's in school, sometimes even on the way back from school. We're just followed by it every day, everywhere, 24/7.
The girls can feel anxious about this. They can start feeling depressed because they don't have what other girls can have.
Most of the time boys just laugh about it and just make jokes, and they don't think it's really serious.
If you think this has always happened in the lives of young people, think again, because technology and social media have created spaces out of the view of parents and teachers, where a young girl can be pestered by up to a dozen boys in one evening to take nude photos, images which can then be distributed in seconds to hundreds of others.
They said that these things are completely normal, that they often don't even challenge or complain about them because they think it's just something that is part of life. So in a sense, they're not complaining about adults not understanding, they're just taking it as a matter of course, which is horrible. It's shocking that young girls should be being sent explicit images.
Each year, at least 13,000 serious allegations reach the police in England and Wales. Our investigation found 2,000 of these were in children aged 10 or younger. This is a challenge for every school and every college.
It is not acceptable, and we have to start with that point of zero tolerance. And this ultimately comes back down to respect. And that is, again, a key facet of how we tackle this. People have got to understand that the behaviours have got consequences and they need to think about their actions.
While they're raising their eyes to the future, young women fear younger girls face ever-increasing pressure. Bramwell Jeffries, BBC News.
A woman who lost her job after saying that people cannot change their biological sex has won an employment appeal tribunal. Maya Fostata, who is 45, did not have her contract renewed as a tax expert at the think tank Centre for Global Development after posting a series of tweets questioning government plans to let people declare their own gender. The Aberdeenshire craft beer company Brewdog has been accused of having a toxic workplace culture by a group of former employees. An open letter signed by more than 60 of them alleges there is a culture of fear at the beer firm. The firm's co-founder has apologised and says lessons will be learned. The Earl of Wessex has spoken to the BBC on what would have been the 100th birthday of his father, the Duke of Edinburgh. Prince Edward, in his first UK broadcast interview since the funeral, described Prince Philip as an extraordinary character. He also said that he felt sadness about the family's relationship with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. He was speaking to our royal correspondent, Daniela Ralph.
We would have loved it if he had been here and been with us. He didn't really want all the fuss and bother, and so we celebrate what might have been and his life, and I think we tried to turn it into something that's very positive.
You must miss him.
Yes. Yes, but it's been a very difficult year, 18 months. The funeral was an extraordinary day. It was a very strange, from coming from the outside with all the pageantry, and then coming into St George's Chapel, especially into the nave, which was completely empty. It was a very moving, very sombre experience.
And a lot of people were moved by seeing your mother as well in the chapel, sitting alone in her mask. It must have been very difficult for you to not be alongside her and able to comfort her that day.
Yes, exactly that. But then that's no different to what so many other families have been experiencing up and down the country throughout this past year.
We can't escape the fact that it has been a difficult few months for the royal family on a number of levels, but particularly around the situation with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex and how that has played out so publicly.
I stay way out of it. It's much the safest place to be.
And do you feel any sadness about how it's played out?
Oh, of course, you know, I mean, there are all sorts of issues and circumstances there, but, you know, we've all been through there. We've all had that same spotlight shone on our lives. We've been subjected to massive intrusion and all the rest of it, and we all deal with it in different ways.
A new baby for Harry and Meghan, the sweet baby Lilibet, a name that will be very meaningful for your family.
Well, we just wish them, you know, all happiness. That's fantastic news, and yeah, absolutely. I hope they're very happy, and yeah.
How would you like your father to be remembered?
Everybody will have their own memories. He was that sort of larger-than-life person. Once met, never forgotten.
The Earl of Wessex paying tribute to his father, the late Duke of Edinburgh. Now, in cricket, it's day one of England's second and final test against New Zealand at Edgbaston. A near-capacity crowd watched an absorbing day's play, with England batting first. Opener Rory Burns made 81, but New Zealand's bowlers also enjoyed plenty of success. A short time ago, they reduced England to 258 for 7. Football, and Scotland have arrived at their training camp to prepare for the European Championships. It's the first time the men's team will play at a major tournament in 23 years. Jane Dougal reports from the camp near Darlington.
This was the last time Scotland men were at a major tournament. The 1998 World Cup in France. And this was the last man to score.
And he's just the player for it, Burley! Yes! He's done it! The tactics have worked!
After 23 years, Scotland are back, arriving at their training base to prepare for the European Championship. Kevin Nisbet, who scored in one of Scotland's warm-up matches, was just a year old when Scotland was last at a major tournament. But he believes head coach Steve Clarke has helped dispel those years of negativity.
Yeah, it's as if it's been completely wiped since the gaffer's come in. He's done a great job. He's got us playing some good football. I think we've got a great team. We've got some top players that are playing at the highest level. So I think get out the group stage and we'll just see what happens from there.
For so long now, Scotland men have had the reputation of being glorious in defeat. But within this squad, there are 10 Premier League players, 2 of whom are holders of Champions League winners' medals. Perhaps this time fans can allow themselves to hope.
We've found new and exciting ways of making a mess of it over the years. And sometimes it's been incredibly complicated, the ways that we've managed to muck it up in the last seconds. This time it's been exactly the opposite. We're on an upward curve. Yeah, we can dream. We are capable of getting through to the next round. Don't ask anything after that. Let's deal with that first.
It's home advantage for their opening match. Hampden hosts Monday's game against the Czech Republic, where 12,000 Tartan Army fans will be the first in a generation to watch Scotland at a major tournament. Jane Dougal, BBC News, Scotland's training camp.
All right, it's time for a look at the weather with Louise Lear. Hello.
Hi there, George. Different day for some. Look at this cloud. We saw some rain as well, not for many, but certainly the further west we had quite a lot of cloud around. So Highland Scotland, bit of a disappointing day for some, but further south and east the cloud broke up really quite nicely and temperatures peaked at around 23, 24 degrees across East Anglia and southeast England. Now here is where we've seen the cloud. You can see it's been fairly well broken, but further west it's been thick enough for some drizzle, misty, murky conditions as we've been seeing down in Cornwall, and that weather front is going to continue to push its way steadily south and east as we go through the night tonight. Now, it does weaken off. It's going to bump into this area of high pressure, and it'll be a band of more persistent, stubborn cloud, I suspect. One thing quite widely across the country, an incredibly mild, quite muggy night for trying to get a good night's sleep. Temperatures widely into the mid-teens. So it's another grey start tomorrow morning, and the clouds thicken up again for some misty conditions across the west coast. There's our weather front across northern England and North Wales, and it will bring more stubborn cloud into the North Midlands as we go through the afternoon. It's going to squeeze the heat into East Anglia and South East England, and behind it, it'll be a little bit more comfortable, not quite as muggy perhaps feeling into the afternoon as well. It does mean for the cricket at Edgbaston there could be more cloud around, but the weak weather front might just produce the odd spot or two of rain. We're not too concerned that it should interrupt play. It will be a dry affair. Now, high pressure builds yet again into the weekend, and that's going to drag more widespread warmth as it pushes its way steadily eastward. So look at the dark russet tones. That's the warmer air pushing right across the country, which means then on Saturday, again, a lot of dry weather, just the far north of Scotland, seeing a few scattered showers, but the clouds should once again break up. We've got that warmth with us and temperatures are really going to start to respond. So we're likely to see highs of around 25 degrees again at 77 Fahrenheit. But it's Sunday that we will see the widespread warmth across the country, potentially temperatures, as you can see, getting up into the high 20s, but quite widely a warm, sunny day. The temperatures are likely to peak in the southeast on Monday, a little bit cooler from Monday onwards. If that's too hot for you, you'll probably be pleased with that good news. Back to you, George.
Louise, thank you. And let me give you a quick reminder of our top story. The Prime Minister and President Biden have met for talks ahead of the G7 Summit of Leaders in Cornwall. And that's all from the BBC's News at 6, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we can now join the BBC's news teams where you are.